first of all, my brain automatically went to, okay, so what's going to be the end of this thing, right? And trying to foresee the future, and maybe trying to figure out what decisions to make so that we can have a good ending to the story rather than bad ending, which I guess is all normal. But it was hard for me to just sit and wait for the answer. And first of all, I found that Ely had an easier time with that. And he helped me through some of those moments, because to him, the unknown was sort of an open possibility and an opportunity.
Okay, so welcome to Beyond the Book, and I have today with me a inspiring guest. Just looking into her and reading her, initial just research into who she is and what she was, I was brought to tears by some of the things I read, and inspired to do better here, and hope to bring that to you, to the listeners as well. We have today Ricki Simon, who lives here in Modine, and this is very exciting to have her in studio. It's always nice and always fun to have you. So welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And so Ricki wrote a book with sort of co-authored with her late husband, Journals of Faith, and it is just that. It's her journal and her husband's journal of themselves. They wrote during difficult times, a difficult time, which we will talk about in this conversation. So can you? So it's important for me. Often I speak to authors who are historians and different types I get to see, and this is so raw and so different of a book that I get to talk to. So can you tell us a little bit just about who you are, where you grew up, and why that influenced and set you up really for this book and life?
Okay. So I grew up in North Miami Beach, Florida. I grew up in a modern Orthodox home, and I went to Israel after that for a year, and then studied at Stern College. Always in mind, after I went to Israel before I went to Israel for the year, I went on the March of the Living, the first one in 1988. And I decided then and there that I'm going to make Aliyah. I was 17 at the time, but I went to Israel for the year, and then I went back to Stern for college, but always with Israel in mind.
But that didn't happen until much later.
Right. So Aliyah happened I came back from Israel in 1989, and I made Aliyah in 2000. So it took a little while. And in between, I got my education, I got married, I had, at the time, 3 children, made Aliyah, and then I started to work in the field of patents. My background was biomedical engineering, and I started to work in patents for medical devices. And I've been doing that now since I made Aliyah in 2000. And I was sort of a very, I would say, logical, rational thinking person. At least that's how I used to think of myself.
Just personality, or because of your education and
I'm
where
not
you were?
sure. That's a good question. I think I was always a very emotional, sensitive child, but as I grew up, my logical side definitely took priority. And I went into the sciences. I was always a religious person, but I don't think that I thought too much about the spiritual side of religion. I did think about my connection to God, but I didn't go beyond that with my thoughts. And I didn't really learn. When I learned Torah, let's say, I liked learning halacha. I liked learning Torah, Chumash, but I didn't really learn, I started at one point when I was in college learning Mesilat Yesharim, and then I put it down after the first few chapters. I wasn't really drawn to the Musar type of learning and that kind of thing when I was younger. And I went into a scientific field, and the world of patents is also very legal.
Cool.
So that also spoke to my legal side and my writing side. when I finished my degrees, I decided to go into patents because it was something that was very flexible. It was good for Aliyah. It was it spoke to my kind of like legal analytical side of my brain, which I like to try to. In patents, you have to kind of get down to the heart of the invention and then be able to articulate what the invention is in very specific words. And the wording is very precise. And then you have to analyze it against other things that exist that are similar. So it's very analytical. And I thought that it was the right direction for me. And I worked in that. I still work in it today. But I started really in 2000 when I made Aliyah. About 10 years after I made Aliyah in 2010, I went through a period of sort of upheaval, as you can probably imagine. And that brought out this other side of me that was kind of dormant, not the analytical side, but the spiritual, emotional, who am I side. And I spent a lot of time doing soul searching and starting to learn some of these other more, I would say, Hasidic and not Kabbalistic. I didn't go into Kabbalah, but I read a lot more of the Ramchal and things of that nature, which helped me kind of realize that this side of me was actually quite strong. It just was dormant for all these years. So that was I would say the first entry into this world in a conscious way. When I got remarried, I remarried Dr. Ely Simon, and he had sort of a similar background in the sense that he was also a scientific person. He was a neurologist and also happened to be a biomedical engineer. And he also grew up in sort of a modern Orthodox kind of logical-minded type of environment.
Where did he grow up?
He grew up in Bayside, New York. So he was very. He actually wrote a book when he was in medical school, but it was on laning. He was a Baal Koreh.
True. That's how we knew him here in Modin as a
right. He was a Baal
quite
Koreh
successful and good Baal Koreh. Yeah.
Yeah. So he wrote a book when he was in medical school or when he was just finishing medical school on Tamei HaMikra, because he felt that there was a need for that, and that also was very analytical. You know, it was very precise, so. But he also, I guess, went through sort of an awakening at some point, and this is sort of where we were like of the same mind, and so very early on in our relationship, we used to discuss these higher level matters all the time. And we didn't discuss them in a theoretical way. We discussed them as they related to our lives, because we had a lot of challenges. This was a second marriage for both of us. We had a lot to deal with, children from both sides and all kinds of other interactions that we had to contend with. And we tried to use our life experience at the time to grow. And that was really, and we did. And we spent really like hours daily. We both worked from home, and we would start our day with our morning coffee and sort of just make sure that we addressed any.
That's a great time to talk. You don't need any excuse why you talk over a coffee. Right?
Yeah, no, it was great. But our morning coffee always most often had to do with, let's say, something that we were dealing with at the time, and then seeing it from the right perspective. Like, how should we view this? What is God trying to tell us? What decisions should we be making? How should we approach this, which is the right thing to do? Those were the types of discussions that we would have over our morning coffee.
What's amazing is that you were doing it together.
Right.
There wasn't one teaching the other and one learning and one, being the Talmidah of the other. It was, doing it together.
Right. That was absolutely true. Although I must say that I do feel that he was my teacher in many ways. and actually, believe it or not, at his levaya, I spoke, and one of the things that I said was that he was my teacher, because I learned so much from him. First of all, he was a few years older than me. He was 7 years older than me, so he had a little bit more life experience, and he had so much depth. So sometimes when I was approaching something from a superficial point of view, he would go right to the heart of it. And so, yeah, we did it together on the one hand, and on the other hand, I really felt like, that I learned a tremendous amount from him. So that was very natural. That was like a very natural place for us, that kind of world of, first of all, the type of learning that we were doing, the things that we were focusing on. We both, at different times, learned through a bunch of different Sfarim that we would talk about, Chavod HaLevavot and Shmona Parakim of the Rambam, and all kinds of things like that really just helped us develop some of these thoughts and ideas. And he very often had a lot of thoughts about these things that were as they connected to neurology, because it all goes back to the brain at the end of the day, and how you think about life and how you approach life and what your perspective is makes such a huge difference, even in certain illnesses, which can be, if you have the right attitude, then you can feel completely differently during those illnesses. And he used to talk about this before he was sick. And so we really had that, that sort of natural connection and way to talk about like higher level things together. So one day he came home and informed me that so basically he was a healthy person. He ate well, he exercised, he was active, he was a perfectly healthy person. I like to joke that it's not a joke, but he didn't even know his Maccabi code to get into the app, because right. He never needed it. And so it was shocking when he said that he was going to go check out. He had felt something in his neck, like a lump or something in his neck, and he didn't know what it was. We weren't particularly worried about it because he had some dental problems and he was supposed to have a root canal, and the dentist said it might just be a reaction to the infection. But nevertheless, they suggested that he get an ultrasound. And so it was with quite a shock that he came home from the ultrasound and informed me that it really does not look very good. They didn't know what it was, but it was a mess somehow. And they told him that he had to get a biopsy and see what was actually going on in there. But it wasn't just a simple infection from the tooth. And so, do you want to ask questions, or should I keep going?
No, just keep going. I'm
okay.
When it dies down, I'll jump in. But
okay.
This is fascinating to me. I'm holding back here. So.
Okay. So when so over the next, I would say, week or so, we got super fast care. Thank God, maybe because he was a doctor and had some connections, but in general, we found that his medical care was excellent. But we ran around getting tests. He had a biopsy a week later, and unfortunately, he was diagnosed with cancer. We were completely shocked. But I must say that immediately, we recognized this as Yad Hashem. Because it was so unexpected and so unusual. And we tend to think of, I'm going to use the word miracles, even though this is difficult to use that word in this context, but miracles we tend to think of as things that are unexpected events, usually for the positive. But we saw this as much the hand of God as any miracle that you might talk about. We knew that with absolute certainty. We just didn't know what it meant and what the result would be. We didn't know if he would recover from it or not. We didn't know, there were a lot of unknowns, but we understood, both of us, that wow, okay, what just happened here? And we looked at it from that context from the beginning, um, which a lot of people, I think, have said things to me like, oh, aren't you angry that this happened? Or, or maybe God didn't know what he was doing, or how could this be? Or questions like that. And of course I'm extremely upset by what happened, but I don't question that. So I don't know. I never have questioned that. And it bothers me when people do question that, because I believe that there is one God. And so if there is one God, then he's the same God that created cancer, that created us, that brought us into the world to begin with, that created life and death. So if we believe that, and we believe that God is good, then there's no, again, back to my logical brain, there's no logical way to get around that, and say that God did something bad in a true sense. Of course, it may be bad for us, but in some ultimate sense, and still believe that there's only one God. So, I mean, and again, these ideas are things that we had been talking about and developing over years. This didn't just come to us in an instant, but this was a huge test. And of course, over the time period while he was sick, it wasn't always as clear and obvious
and simple, right?
And simple. But what the point that I'm trying to make is that our orientation was already such that when this happened to us, we were able to see it through that lens.
Right. And you mentioned this now, and you mentioned also in your book that the being in a unknown situation is a challenge and an opportunity. And you took the opportunity. Can you speak to the challenge of just people find in all situations of being in that unknown? You write that you were waiting to find out, and that was like a painful experience. Right.
So the unknown was very difficult. I think it's actually, a lot of people can relate to it nowadays because of coronavirus. Just not knowing what's going to be, and all of those feelings of the unknown, I think are very familiar to most people in the world now. But when it happened, yeah, I think that was one of the most difficult things to deal with, because first of all, my brain automatically went to, okay, so what's going to be the end of this thing, right? And trying to foresee the future, and maybe trying to figure out what decisions to make so that we can have a good ending to the story rather than a bad ending, which I guess is all normal, but it was hard for me to just sit and wait for the answer. And first of all, I found that Ely had an easier time with that. And he helped me through some of those moments, because to him, the unknown was sort of an open possibility and an opportunity. So the fact that we didn't know was, in a way, better than knowing something that was not good, because there was still the possibility that it would turn out okay.
It's not necessarily a natural. I mean, that's something that's been worked on for him, because that's not a natural place to be. The natural place is the unknown, and then you just want it answered, even if it's bad. You just want the answer.
Right. So he definitely worked on that, and this is something also that we had talked about in different contexts over the years. But he was right on it. I mean, he was like, when I said, "Yeah, but what's going to be, or what are we going to do?" and he was like, "Okay, let's take a deep breath. This is where we are right now. Where we are right now is." We don't know. And so, first of all, that gives a lot of room for tefillah. That's number one. Because once the thing is already a done deal, then your tefillah would have to be different. And it gives a lot of room for hope. And it gives room for doing whatever we can to change the situation in whatever way we are able to. So he saw those time periods as sort of a hopeful time. Maybe not always. He had a few dark moments, but much fewer than I did. And that was a real challenge. Because you just, it introduces fear. And fear is something that is really difficult to deal with. So I found that when I had these moments of fear, sometimes they took over me and I just couldn't manage it. But when I was able to kind of recognize what was happening, I had like a sort of super awareness of where I was. And I realized that this is just fear creeping in, then I was able to kind of deal with it because it became something in a way external. Like, this is fear, this is not reality. If it's not the actual reality, then don't let fear take over your brain.
And fear was a no-go for you. You didn't let that in, or tried not to.
I tried not to. I can't say that I was always successful, but I tried not to.
Right. I find myself often talking to my wife just about what's happening now, that you mentioned over Corona, but in a smaller way. But there's, kids are in school, kids are not in school. What's going to be? Can we fly? Can these people come? Can we go here? Can we go there? And life is in this world of unknown. And we always we almost write lists of what do we know? We know that we have 4 beautiful children. We know that we have them at home. We know that we still have to raise them. And we know that we can raise them. We have so school's an unknown, but don't live in the unknown. Live in the known. And it's limited. But once you know that and you can live there, then there's so much more to do.
Right. And that's a great place to be, what you're describing, because that's taking it from a positive perspective, because the truth of the matter is life is unknown. I mean, even when we're not aware of it, right? We think that things are secure and that we know what's going on and that our kids are going to have school tomorrow and that everything is fine, but nobody knows anything. We don't know what's going to happen in the next minute, right? So we do live in a state
that's just to speak to, that's the opposite of fear. That's like almost irrational. Like it might end, it could end, and it can go fast. And therefore, you do things differently with that known, but not afraid that it's going to end necessarily, right. But the knowledge of that it can.
Right.
It will.
That's right. And Ely was very aware of the fact that this was a wake-up call. It reminded us that our lives are limited. We didn't know that his life was so limited at the time. They said it was curable, and we went through a whole bunch of treatments. But he realized that this was a wake-up call, like, oh, you might think you have another 30, 40 years to live, whatever it is, but you don't know how long you have to live. And so we all have to live our lives as if we don't know how long we have to live. We have to remember that. And it's very hard to do that when you're young and healthy and everything seems to be fine. But when you're hit with a sudden illness, especially, it hits you in the face that, oh, your assumptions might have been wrong. And so you have to rethink. It's like what you said about having 4 beautiful children and you have to raise your children. So go back to, wait, what is my job? What do I need to do? Focus on that rather than the what ifs of things don't work out well. What if my kid gets sick tomorrow? What if they don't have school? What am I going to do if I lose my job? What if, all kinds of what ifs. You could go nuts with all the what ifs, right? But if you get back to that focus of what is, like what you said, and what is it that I have to do here in this world, then that the rest of it kind of fades away to the background. And that was what was most helpful, I would say, in going through these uncertain times, was just refocusing on, okay, wait, what are we supposed to be doing now with the illness, with our time? We decided to write down our thoughts, and that's what the book came out of, our journal entries during this time period. But that was something that we both understood was something we had to do at this time.
Did it affect, like, his strength and your strength? Did that affect everyone around you and the mood in the house and the mood in the greater, larger families?
So probably it did. I don't really know. I actually think that in some instances, it was difficult for people because other people that were close to us were worried, and we were telling them we saw this from a different perspective, and they didn't understand that perspective, and so they couldn't really just cry to us because we weren't going there.
Right.
So in a certain way, I think it may have made it
difficult, right, almost, for them.
Yeah.
But when you saw him, you understood what the strength that he had, and that it was coming from inner strength and from emunah and bitachon.
Absolutely. I knew that without a doubt from the first minute that he came back from that ultrasound. And that never wavered. I mean, that was what was so incredible. Like, I had my ups and downs, but he was so consistent. He really, and he was the one suffering physically. He really just had complete emunah that this was something that happened to him for some reason, and he had to view it from the lens of what is my job in the world and what do I need to do with whatever time I have in the world, whether it's short or long or whatever happens, and to constantly be reprioritizing and refocusing that. I remember when literally that day when he came home from the ultrasound, he sat down to his computer and he made a list. Now, he just understand, he didn't know that this was a life-threatening thing. He just knew that it was more than he had thought, okay? He sat down at his computer and he made a list of things that he should focus on and try to accomplish and things that he should not focus on and waste time with. He literally made a list. I still have it in the computer.
Wow.
And you know, one of the things in his list, just as an example, was of something not to spend time on was to travel, for example. Because even though it might be something interesting and it didn't serve in his mind what he was put in the world to do. And so if somebody was put in the world to travel because they have something behind that, then great. But for him, he felt that was just something that would give him pleasure. And so it was off his list.
Whoa. Right. That's like to go back and read that just shows you what a person is when you see their priorities on their list. And what inspired you were writing almost from the moment he came back from that first from the first appointment. So what inspired you to start writing, and did you think it was going to become this?
So it was a combination of things. One was it was a good outlet for both of us, each of us in our own way.
Did you read your own and read each other's while you were writing, or it was
sometimes, but not always. A lot of the things I only saw much later. So it was definitely an outlet and a way of expressing what we were feeling and what we were going through, and it helped. And yes, I have to say that, I mean, he saw this very clearly as a future book. He thought that if we can put down on paper the way that we see the world as we're going through it, then maybe later it can help other people who are going through difficult times. He knew that from the beginning.
He knew it.
Yeah.
Fascinating. I think that speaks to the power here of the book, of what you've written and what you've gone through, that you're giving us the process. Not just the end, the formula of this is how you have faith in God, or this is how you go through difficult times, but this is how I did. Take it or leave it, but this is how I did it. And this is the formula, the process of how we get to that. And that's what touched me and spoke to me. Very often, like you mentioned, the Musser's farm, they tell you this is what, everything is for the good, and they give you the form, the pieces.
Right.
But you need the test, and to watch that test play out in front of you, it's
right. And it was a test of 6 months, which on the one hand was a very long time, and on the other hand was a very short time. So it was, I think, it was enough time that we were able to really experience a lot of ups and downs and put the thoughts down on paper. So, I mean, obviously I would have liked for him to have lived longer than that. But again, that wasn't up to any of us, not even the doctors. They did their best. And I knew after he passed away that, like, I had to carry forth this mission that he had already put into place. I mean, we both did, but it was really his vision. And so for the first, I would say almost immediately, but for the first 6 months after he passed away, this was what occupied a large part of my time, was putting this book together. And it was also helpful for me because it reminded me along the way of all of the things that we had learned, and now I was going through another whole challenge, which I had to deal with without him. Dealing with the challenge beforehand was difficult, but at least I had him. And so during the period of the time when I was putting the book together, that was actually very helpful for me as well.
And so how has this grown, larger than the book, or is it growing into another book, into more ideas? And how are you growing this mission?
That's a good question. I haven't quite figured that out yet.
Well, and then to add, how can I help and how can we help as a general, what can this become? Because I think that this is a wonderful mission, a wonderful way to remember him and to remember what he did, what he gave to us, this gift of strength.
Right. So, I mean, I have a few thoughts and ideas about some future things, which I don't really know yet. He actually has a whole bunch of other things that are on his computer that he had written.
Books.
Yeah, I mean, it could end up as a book or several books. I'll just say that he actually wrote another book before this. A few years before, he had written a book called Embracing the Unknown, Embracing the Unknown. Wow. But it was from a different perspective. It was from the perspective of, as a scientist, being in awe of science and nature and all of the unbelievable details and perfection in the world. And the fact that we can't understand even a fraction of it with all that we know in science and all of the advances that we've made. And there are a lot, and we have a lot to be proud of as human beings, but it doesn't even come close to a kernel of a fraction of what actually is. And so he wrote a book about that, and he had written a bunch of other pieces that he was going to put into some future books about not just science, but also human nature and also events in the world. And I don't know, I'm not sure what, if anything, I will do or can do with some of the things that he wrote, but I do have in mind that I would like to try to publish some more. This book that we put out in and of itself, it came out at a bad time in terms of Corona. So I wasn't able to go out and speak to people, but I'm happy to do that. Especially if I'm happy to speak to people individually who are going through a hard time and want some insight or chizuk or understanding of how to cope. I don't know, again, it's a very individual thing. And I think that the fact that we both sort of groomed ourselves in a certain way of thinking before this happened was very helpful for us. And I don't know, and everybody has their own world and their own state of mind and their own way of viewing the events that happen to them in their lives. But I think that there are some basic truths that can be helpful for people when they're going through a hard time. So,
that's fascinating. What are some svarim or books that you draw inspiration from now, or maybe that you did together?
Okay, so, I'll say that the first book that I turned to after he passed away was, so the first book that I turned to was Derech Hashem, the Ramchal. It gave me tremendous chizuk, that book, because it just brought me into this world of, wow, there's so much more than what meets the eye. And the spiritual realm and the worlds that God created besides our little physical world, which is not so little, it's actually huge, but it's enormous, all the other aspects of what exists. It gave me tremendous, tremendous comfort because I felt that his neshama is still alive and well. And I also listened to some talks by Rabbi Manis Friedman, who I still listen to. I find him to also be very helpful and inspirational. I think that what really got me listening to him was the talk that he gave. He gave a certain talk about the soul and the afterlife.
Right.
And it just was very, very comforting to me, and it rang true. It wasn't just like, oh, let me hope that this is true. It really felt right and real. So those are just a couple of things more, I would say more recently. Not more recently, but after he passed away. And I'm always searching for, I recently read a book by Rabbi Avram Twersky, which is a little bit different. It's more practical, but it also speaks to who are we as people, and what are the things that we can do in our lives to bring out the higher self rather than, the self that we're used to dealing with. And so I find him to also be helpful and inspirational. Let me think.
And together you mentioned the Chovos HaLevavos. That's what you were.
Right. So Chovot HaLevavot and Mesilat Yesharim and Orchot Tzadikim, all of those sort of classic Musar books were, I go back to them now also sometimes, but at the time that was like the go-to. And Shmona Prakim of the Rambam, that also. A lot of our focus was not just about like the spiritual realm and what's out there, but the idea of midot and how to correct midot, because it's actually intricately linked to this higher level, right? Because when you see yourself as, okay, what are the things that I need to work on in myself, and everybody has plenty to work on, and when you try to isolate those things, like when you look at let me say it this way, when you look at the events that happen to you as they interact with your particular midot, right? Then you can see the events that happen to you as opportunities for growth.
Right.
Okay, so midot work was a big part of what we talked about a lot, not because, we have to just be better people, but just because we really saw everything that happened to us as like, oh, okay, now this aspect of my personality is having trouble, right? Dealing with this particular situation. And so if I can isolate that and work on it and overcome this challenge, then that challenge will have been for a purpose, which is for me to become better in that particular realm. And so that's sort of just giving you a little insight into the lens that we viewed the world. So
from the beginning, from when you started talking, I noticed that your work affected who you were as a person, how you thought. And that's why maybe you went down that road because you had more of a rational approach to Judaism, and then maybe you had a more rational approach to Judaism because of your work, and everything sort of affected. And then when that change happened, maybe religiously or in your mindset, so then it changes the way you work, and it changes the way you do, and it changes the way you act. Everything works together. Right. And that's something that I find is challenging for people and myself when I find I'm in a challenging time. Let's say at work, I'm in a scuffle. So really that's midot, and really that's me that needs to get worked on. And that's my relationship with Hashem that really is in play here. And everything is affected. So
right. So that actually speaks to the other thing that I started to learn, which was coaching. I haven't really been practicing, but I did. And maybe I still will, but there's been a lot of different things to deal with in the meantime. But the coaching approach is also that, and I found that it went hand in hand. It goes hand in hand with this idea, because when things happen to you, if somebody does something to you, let's say, right, and you get angry about it or you get upset with that person, the right way to deal with most situations is to look inward rather than outward. And yes, it could be that the other person was wrong and that the other person did something bad, but that's not for you to figure out. What's for you to figure out is, where does this meet up with me and my personality and the things that I need to improve? And if you can do that, and if you can try to like practice doing that more and more often, then the external things bother you less, because then you go internally and you say, okay, wait, hold on. It's like that movie. What's that movie with the different feelings? The Disney movie.
Inside Out.
Inside Out. It's like that movie Inside Out, where like the different emotions had like their own little personalities, right? So I almost visualize it that way, where we have these little emotions inside of us, and sometimes a certain. Oh, is that the siren? It's the siren.
Yeah, we'll stop for a minute. 11. I thought it was 10.
No, it's 11. For some reason, it's 11 on Yom HaZikaron and 10 on Yom HaShoah. I don't know why.
Right. That's mine.
Yeah.
It's a good day to do this. Like you take that minute to think, and you just thinking about pain of families and pain of people. And set yourself up.
Right.
Work on yourself now so that you can be ready and recognize where it's coming from and what they're.
Yeah, in a way. And in a way, it's also good to just live your life without worrying about that,
Okay.
Because I think that as much as I say that we prepared ourselves, you can never prepare yourself. And
Right.
so
I think Midot is the best way to prepare yourself. You do what you need to do and perfect what you need to. Things are going to happen around you all day,
right.
to you, around you, and it's what you do with it.
Right. And that's the best you can do, but you're never going to be prepared.
Right.
Yeah. I remember thinking, I found out very shortly before he passed away that it was looking bad. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I almost was imagining how I would feel if he actually passed away. And I think I was trying to protect myself from falling down when it actually happened, if I could prepare myself. But I found that you just couldn't do that, because when it actually happened, it was completely different than
you'd imagine.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Okay. Well, if there's any messages that you want to say to my listeners, just about maybe anything else about your book that you didn't cover, or about you, about something you want to tell them that they can give them a chizuk and help them strengthen themselves, then.
Okay. I think the key things really that help me, that always to remember, are that there is one God and He's good. And if you carry that around with you and you really, really work on remembering that when times are hard, then you can start to get out of whatever bad situation you're in, at least in your own head. And if you see the situation differently and you recognize that it's come into your life, the situation that you're in has come into your life for some reason, whether it's some bigger reason or some smaller reason or whatever, and your question is really not why did it happen, but what do I do with this thing that happened, then you can deal with things a little bit better.
Powerful. And thank you for coming on and sharing this message. And
okay, thank you very much.
Okay.